Milgram obedience experiments. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram at Yale University ran one of the most disturbing experiments in history. You sit in a cramped room and believe you are part of a learning study. A researcher in a lab coat tells you to administer electric shocks when the other person answers wrong. The shocks are fake, but you do not know that. The screams sound real. You hesitate. The researcher says calmly, "Please continue." You press the button. Again and again. Ordinary people, teachers, nurses, accountants, pushed the lever all the way to a level marked danger, severe shock. 65% of participants delivered the maximum 450 volts. That number should terrify you. Here is what is really happening. People tend to shift responsibility when authority frames an action as official. The step-by-step direction makes harm feel like a task. Distance matters too. When the subject was visible, obedience dropped. When an ally refused obedience, people stopped quickly. That pattern shows how situations shape behavior more than character alone. The finding does not mean everyone is evil. It means your neighbor, your teacher, maybe even you, can be nudged into doing something monstrous. That is the terrifying part. This is the mechanism that makes genocides possible. Not monsters, just ordinary people following instructions. Later replications and modern ethics have added nuance, but the core finding stands. The good news, if you can call it that, is that the fix is simple. Encourage dissent. Make responsibility explicit. Reduce blind reliance on distant authority. The study sparked outrage because it felt like a mirror held up to every ordinary choice. Critics later asked how much the actor in the lab shaped the outcome. Replications found boundaries. In some modern tests, obedience drops when people see another person refuse. When the supposed victim sits nearby, obedience drops even more. When authority looks unsure, people refuse sooner. A partial replication decades later used stricter ethical limits and still found worrying levels of compliance. The size of the effect changed with context, but the direction did not vanish. That is the important part. The lesson is not that humans are irredeemably cruel. The lesson is that systems turn private decisions into public outcomes. Think about everyday places where this pattern plays out. Work orders from distant managers, on orders in hierarchical institutions, online mobs urging punishment without verification. Those are real-world versions of the lab conditions. Small changes flip behavior. One voice saying no, a clear rule about responsibility, visibility between actor and consequence. Here is what actually breaks the pattern. Train people to name responsibility out loud. Encourage dissenting voices. Structure tasks so that no single person can hide behind authority alone. Audit chains of command and build safe ways to refuse unlawful or harmful orders. These fixes are embarrassingly cheap compared with the damage they prevent. The study teaches one clear rule. Systems shape choices more than you might expect. Design matters. Human character still matters, but character is expressed inside systems, which makes designing better systems the most powerful tool we have. Stanford Prison Experiment. In August 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo converted a basement at Stanford University into a fake prison. You volunteer for a study about prison life and are randomly assigned as a guard or a prisoner. The guards get khaki uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, and wooden batons. The prisoners get smocks, ankle chains, and numbers instead of names. At first it feels like theater. Then the masks become faces. Within 36 hours, the guards start inventing punishments. They force prisoners to do push-ups, clean toilets with bare hands, and repeat humiliating phrases. By day 3, one prisoner has a nervous breakdown. By day 6, Zimbardo shuts it down because he realizes he has lost control. The study was supposed to run 2 weeks. It lasted 6 days. Here is what makes this genuinely chilling. These were not troubled people. They were college students who passed psychological screenings. Just like Milgram found, ordinary people can become instruments of cruelty when the situation is designed a certain way. The experiment shows how quickly a uniform and a role can rewrite someone's behavior. That speed is what haunts researchers. But the truth is more complex. Later critics found the lead researcher shaped what happened. Some guards reported they were playing a part they thought the researchers wanted. That does not erase the damage. It does show that expectations and direction from authority can amplify bad outcomes. The practical lessons are clear and urgent. Systems that give unchecked power to a few people create risk. Lack of oversight turns petty cruelty into institutional practice. If organizations rotate roles, require external monitoring, and make refusal safe, then the pressure to conform to cruel scripts falls dramatically. The pattern shows up everywhere: workplaces where managers demand blind loyalty, online platforms where moderators and mobs enforce rules without appeal, prisons where guards have unchecked power over inmates for years, not days. If 6 days can break people, imagine what years can do. That is why the real warning is institutional. People are capable of extraordinary kindness, but give them a role, a uniform, and permission to dominate, and kindness evaporates fast. That makes redesigning power structures a moral emergency. The controversy did not stop the lesson. The episode forced a worldwide argument about how power and context shape behavior. Critics pointed out that the lead researcher was not neutral. Some guards later said they were following cues from researchers or trying to please them. That matters because it shows how expectations and direction can turbocharge bad actions. At the same time, many participants suffered real harm. The emotional breakdowns were not staged for everyone. Some prisoners left the study shaken. The result is a warning and a mirror. It suggests two urgent priorities. 1. Build strong external oversight. 2. Design institutions so that no single role concentrates unchecked power. Those priorities are not abstract. Simple steps reduce risk. Require independent monitors who can stop activities without asking anyone who benefits from them. Rotate authority so the same person cannot become entrenched. Create clear whistleblower channels that protect the person who says no. Train people to spot role drift and to name responsibility out loud. There is another layer that makes this more than a lab story. Real institutions sometimes mimic the worst features of the experiment. Anonymous decision-making, reward systems that praise toughness and silence doubt. That is where harm becomes routine instead of episodic. The hopeful truth is this: people can resist. One person saying no often changes the whole dynamic. Systems can be rebuilt to support that no. The experiment is evidence not of inevitable doom, but of a design problem. Fix the design, and you change the outcome. Asch Conformity experiments. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch at Swarthmore College designed an experiment so simple, it seems impossible that it would reveal anything profound. You are in a room with a handful of other people. The task is absurdly easy. Match the line on one card to the matching line on another card. The answer is obvious. But then something strange happens. Everyone else in the room gives the same wrong answer. The pressure is silent, but intense. You start to doubt your own eyes. Asch had planted actors who deliberately said the wrong line. The shocking result was how often the real volunteer went along with the group. 75% of participants conformed at least once. On the critical trials, about 1/3 gave answers they knew were wrong just to match the crowd. For a task with a blatantly obvious answer, that number is disturbing. Here is what that reveals about people. We are wired to fit in. Social acceptance matters. Public answers change behavior more than private ones. When people can write their answer secretly, the effect mostly disappears. When even one person breaks from the group, conformity drops sharply. Those simple facts are the escape routes from the doom story. The effect also depends on culture and context. In some groups, the pressure is weaker. In others, it is stronger. Online life complicates this further because visible likes and counts turn opinions into a social force. The same urge to fit that Asch exposed now scales into comment sections and group chats. So, the basic defense is structural. Make room for private judgments, build in dissent, reward those who voice alternative views, and teach people the simple habit of asking for a second opinion when the group seems unanimous. Good Samaritan Experiment. In 1973, psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson ran an experiment at Princeton Theological Seminary that should make anyone uncomfortable. You are a seminary student rushing across campus to deliver a sermon. On your way, you pass a man slumped in a doorway, coughing and groaning, clearly in distress. You have minutes to spare, or you are already late. What do you do? The researchers split the students into two groups. Some were told they had plenty of time. Others were told they were already late. Every student walked past the same actor, pretending to be in distress. The results were brutal. The results were stark. Of the students who were not in a hurry, 63% stopped to help. Of the students who were rushed, only 10% stopped. That gap is enormous. Even more unsettling, some of the hurried students literally stepped over the person in distress to get to their appointment. And here is the twist. Half of the students were about to give a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan, the story about stopping to help a stranger in need. Thinking about the moral lesson made no difference. The single biggest predictor of helping was whether they felt rushed. That finding cuts deep. It suggests that situational pressure can override even freshly activated moral values. The experiment does not prove people are bad. It proves that context shapes behavior in ways we underestimate. When cognitive load is high and time feels scarce, our attention narrows. We literally fail to see needs that we would otherwise notice. The brain prioritizes the immediate task and filters out peripheral signals. That is not cruelty. It is a design feature of attention under stress. But the result looks like indifference. And here is the irony. These were students on their way to preach about helping strangers, and they stepped over a stranger to do it. The escape hatch is awareness, knowing that time pressure shrinks. Compassion helps us build in buffers. Schedule margins. Slow down rituals before important transitions. Organizations can design environments that reduce chronic rush. When people are not constantly behind, they notice more and help more. There is also a structural lesson. Do not assume that moral education alone changes behavior. Values matter, but they compete with situational forces. If you want helping behavior, you must also design situations that allow people to act on their values, create visible pauses, reduce the cost of stopping, make it easy to ask for extensions or backup. That is how systems support the good intentions people already have. The third wave. In April 1967, history teacher Ron Jones at Cubberley High School in Palo Alto, California, tried to answer a student's question. How could ordinary Germans claim they did not know about the Holocaust? His answer became one of the most unsettling classroom experiments ever conducted. Jones walked into class and announced new rules. Sit up straight. Speak only when called upon. Address me as Mr. Jones. The students complied immediately. By day 2, he introduced a salute, a membership card, and a slogan. Strength through discipline. We're strength through community. The third wave was born. Students who felt invisible at home suddenly had status at school. It moved fast. Students policed one another. Newcomers were pressured to follow. Dissent felt like betrayal. The group created an us and a them without complex ideology. The feeling of unity made everything else look urgent and right. Why did it work so quickly? Humans crave identity and clear social roles. Rituals and rewards reduce uncertainty. When a group offers belonging and simple actions to prove loyalty, people trade some independence for acceptance. That trade is efficient and emotionally powerful. The episode shows how small design choices produce big social consequences. Uniforms, rituals, and public displays of loyalty are cheap to create and hard to unwind. In a classroom, the teacher cut the experiment short when the performance stopped feeling like a lesson and started feeling like a movement. This is not a controlled lab study in the scientific sense. It was an exercise that exposed a mechanism. The frightening part is how ordinary the steps were and how quickly ordinary students complied. That is the part that keeps this story alive in warnings about authoritarian drift. Blue eyes, brown eyes. On April 5, 1968, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, third-grade teacher Jane Elliott in Riceville, Iowa, tried to teach her all-white class what discrimination feels like. She told the children that today, brown-eyed people are superior. Blue-eyed children had to wear collars and sit in the back. The room rearranged itself in minutes. Within a single day, the brown-eyed children became arrogant. They completed tasks faster, bullied the blue-eyed kids, and reported rule violations. The blue-eyed children slumped. Their test scores dropped. They internalized shame. The next day, Elliott reversed the roles. The same transformation happened in reverse. Children who had been dominant became withdrawn. Children who had been crushed became aggressive. The speed of the change is what makes this exercise unforgettable. Prejudice was not taught through history lessons or angry rhetoric. It was taught through one simple label and a few arbitrary rules. Just like the third wave showed how fast authoritarianism spreads, blue eyes showed how fast bias takes root. The mechanics are disturbingly simple. Signal who is superior. Reward compliance. Teach others to police the boundary. The group becomes a mirror. There are important cautions. Using children in this way risks harm. The exercise is ethically contested for a reason. It worked because the experience was intense and immediate. Modern anti-racism training often borrows the lesson without repeating the harm. Controlled adult variants with structured debriefs are crucial. The practical takeaway is straightforward. Build empathy through guided contact, not humiliation. Teach kids to question status signals. Create classrooms that value effort and curiosity over arbitrary markers. Train teachers to spot subtle cues of favoritism and to reset them immediately. The point is sharp. Prejudice is not only ancient anger, it is learned fast from small cues. That makes prevention practical. It is easier to stop a signal than to undo a hardened identity. A Darley and Latané bystander effect. In the late 1960s, John Darley and Bib Latané were haunted by a question. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment in Queens, New York, while neighbors reportedly watched and did nothing. Though the story was later revealed to be exaggerated, it launched a research program that changed psychology forever. You hear a shout in a busy hallway. People glance up but keep walking. You assume someone else will call for help. That tiny assumption is exactly what the researchers wanted to understand. In one experiment, participants heard someone having a seizure over an intercom. When they believed they were the only listener, 85% rushed to help. When they believed 4 others were also listening, only 31% helped. In another study, smoke slowly filled a waiting room. Participants alone reported it within minutes. But when 2 passive actors sat nearby doing nothing, 75% of participants never reported the smoke at all. They sat in a room filling with smoke and did nothing because nobody else seemed worried. The mechanics are invisible but powerful. When others are present, responsibility diffuses. Your brain looks outward for cues on how to react. If nobody else panics, you interpret the situation as less urgent. This is pluralistic ignorance. Everyone privately feels concern, but publicly does nothing, because everyone else looks calm. That social slip is what turns potential rescuers into quiet observers. The original murder in a city was widely misreported and later complicated. The headline version made the story louder than the facts. That does not erase the basic pattern the experiments revealed. Even small degrees of ambiguity and the presence of others can delay life-saving action. There are bright, practical fixes. The single most effective step is to assign responsibility out loud. Point at a specific person and say, "Call for help." When someone is named, the diffusion breaks, and action increases. Making expectations clear and training people in simple intervention steps also helps. The bystander effect is not a condemnation of human kindness. It is a map of a predictable social trap. Once you know the trap, you can plan around it. Teach people to notice uncertain moments and to speak up. Small, scripted actions prevent large tragedies. You learned the basic trap. There is more to the story that matters for real life. Researchers ran replications that showed the effect holds across many situations when ambiguity or diffusion is present. But they also found boundary conditions. Clear signs of danger and direct instructions cut the delay almost entirely. Today, the effect shows up in new places. Online versions appear when people see harassment or an emergency in a live stream. Hundreds watch and few act. The same social signals apply. If no one comments urging help, viewers assume it is not urgent. That creates a dangerous silence at scale. Hundreds of people watching, 0 people acting. The internet somehow made the bystander effect worse. The fix is almost stupidly simple. Point to a person and say, "Call for help now." That one action moves responsibility from a fog into a named pocket. Another simple tool is a short script to practice. Teach people to say, "I need you to call for help," and then give a specific task like call emergency services or find an AED. Scripts remove uncertainty and give permission to act. Communities can also design for action. Install visible guidelines in public spaces that invite intervention. Run brief bystander training at schools and workplaces using role play. Ensure emergency phones and clear signage reduce ambiguity. These structural fixes scale better than guilt or moralizing. There are cultural caveats. In some places, fear of legal consequences or retaliation slows people. Good policy reduces those barriers with Good Samaritan protections, and by making reporting simple and anonymous when necessary. So remember the core rule. Name a person, give a task, use a script, train often. Those 3 steps turn passive witnesses into helpers. A robber's cave. In the summer of 1954, psychologist Muzaffar Sharif brought 22 11-year-old boys to a remote campsite in Robbers Cave State Park, Oklahoma. None of the boys knew each other. They were divided into 2 groups and given separate cabins. The first few days were calm. Each group hiked, swam, and invented its own songs and slang. The Eagles, the Rattlers. Identity formed fast. Then the researchers introduced competitions, tug-of-war contests, cabin inspections with prizes. Pride swelled. Taunts began. Within days, small insults turned into raids. The Rattlers burned the Eagles' flag. The Eagles ransacked the Rattlers' cabin. Boys who had no reason to hate each other now refused to eat in the same room. This is the chilling part. Group identity forms fast when people share goals and compete over scarce rewards. The mechanics are basic. Competition focuses attention on differences. Shared routines create loyalty. When loyalty rises, so does suspicion of outsiders. It feels tribal because the brain finds simple categories useful. It gets worse when leaders or institutions encourage the divide. Rewards for winning, jokes that degrade the other side, and anonymous acts all accelerate hostility. The boys began to police each other. Norms formed quickly, and once norms exist, they become self-reinforcing. That is why the story is so unnerving. These were not gang members or soldiers. They were 11-year-olds at summer camp. It shows how ordinary contexts can produce intergroup hatred without ancient grudges. At the same time, the experiment also tested a surprising fix, which changes the whole message. 2 groups that fight can be made to work together when the task requires cooperation to succeed. The rest of the lesson is about how cooperation dissolves conflict. Then, the researchers tried something surprising. They gave the 2 groups a problem they could not solve alone. A water supply broke. A truck stuck in the mud needed both groups to pull. The boys who had been enemies now had to cooperate to succeed. Slowly, the taunts faded, and tasks replaced insults. The trick was not magic, it was structural, and honestly, a little embarrassing. All it took to undo weeks of hatred was a stuck truck. Shared goals that required real cooperation change the incentives. When success depends on both sides, people stop seeing one another as purely rivals. They start seeing each other as necessary partners. A contact without competition often fails. Contact with interdependence succeeds. That is the core policy lesson. If you want to reduce hostility, do not only bring people together. Make them depend on one another to meet a clear joint goal. Design tasks so that each group contributes something unique. Reward joint success. Remove zero-sum rewards that make every gain for one side a loss for the other. There are practical examples that work. In communities, create joint neighborhood projects that require shared labor and shared benefits. In workplaces, set collaborative targets that require cross-team coordination rather than internal scorekeeping. In schools, design service projects where rival classes must build something together to win a common prize. There are limits and cautions. Superordinate goals can be manipulated. If one side keeps the rewards or controls the rules, the cooperation will collapse. The shared goal must be genuinely shared. The roles must be fair. The benefits must be visible to everyone. So the darker truth becomes useful. The experiment shows how easily conflict starts and how deliberately it can be undone. It is not proof of inevitable doom. It is proof that design matters. Build systems that make people depend on one another for success, and you nudge rivalry toward repair. Facebook Emotional Contagion Study. In January 2012, data scientists at Facebook ran an experiment on 689,000 users without telling them. For 1 week, some users saw fewer positive posts in their feeds. Others saw fewer negative posts. The result was measurable and disturbing. People exposed to less positive content wrote more negative posts themselves. People shown less negativity wrote more positively. The effect size was small for any individual user. But here is the terrifying part. 689,000 people. 1 week, no consent. The experiment proved what many suspected. Your mood can be engineered by an algorithm, and you will never know it happened. When the study was published in 2014, the backlash was fierce. Users felt violated. Regulators demanded answers. The question became larger than one study. People asked if users had given meaningful consent and whether companies should experiment on moods without explicit permission. Regulators, ethicists, and users pushed back hard. The study became a lens for a larger question. When a private company can shift public feeling, one who sets the rules for what is permissible and who watches the watchers. The modern implication is clear and uncomfortable. Algorithms are not neutral. They rank, amplify, and subtly reward certain emotions and topics. That shapes news cycles, elections, and private mental health. The next part looks at what can be done. Transparency, independent audits, and simple user controls reduce risk. For now, remember this simple fact. What you feel on a feed can be engineered. Ultimatum game. In the early 1980s, economist Werner Guth invented a simple game that broke economic theory. You sit across from a stranger, an experimenter hands them $10 and tells them to split it with you however they want. If you accept the offer, you both keep your shares. If you reject it, neither of you gets anything. Rationally, you should accept any offer. $1 is better than zero. But humans are not rational. Guth found that most proposers offered between 40 and 50%, and most responders rejected offers below 30%. People turned down free money to punish unfairness. That is not what economic models predicted. Economists spent decades assuming humans are rational. Turns out, we would rather burn money than let someone else win unfairly. We carry a fairness instinct so powerful that we pay to enforce it. Brain scans show that unfair offers activate the same regions as physical disgust. The decision to reject is not calculated, it is visceral. Here is what makes this unsettling. The willingness to punish unfairness can be weaponized. People reject deals that would help them just to hurt someone else. That impulse scales. Voters reject policies that would benefit them because they believe others benefit more. Groups sabotage cooperation because one side appears to gain an edge. The game also reveals cultural differences. In some societies, the threshold for rejection is higher or lower. Norms about fairness are not universal, but the tendency to enforce norms is. So what does this mean for the doom narrative? People are not purely selfish, but they are also not purely cooperative. We carry an instinct to punish even when punishment hurts us. That instinct can destroy deals that would help everyone. It can turn negotiations into standoffs and politics into tribal warfare. The practical lesson is design. If you want cooperation, build systems where gains feel fair to all sides. Make the distribution visible and balanced. Avoid winner-take all structures that trigger the rejection reflex. Frame outcomes as mutual wins rather than one-sided advantages. Those changes reduce the instinct to burn everything down. There is also a deeper lesson. Fairness is not optional. Systems that ignore it trigger resistance and sabotage. Building fairness into the structure is not a luxury. It is a design requirement for durable cooperation. So, what does all of this mean? 10 experiments, decades of research, thousands of participants, and a single uncomfortable conclusion. Humanity is not doomed by nature. We are doomed by design. Every experiment in this list revealed the same pattern. Ordinary people, good people, your neighbors and colleagues, and maybe you, can be pushed into cruelty, conformity, and indifference by the systems around them. Milgram showed that authority dissolves personal responsibility. Zimbardo showed that roles rewrite identity. Asch showed that social pressure overrides our own senses. The Good Samaritan study showed that being late matters more than being moral. The Third Wave and Blue Eyes proved that tribalism can be manufactured in a classroom in hours. The Bystander effect revealed that crowds create paralysis. Robbers Cave demonstrated that competition breeds hatred. Facebook proved that algorithms shape emotions at scale. And the Ultimatum game exposed a fairness instinct so strong that we burn resources to enforce it, even when it hurts us. But here is the part that matters. Every one of these experiments also found escape routes. One ally breaks the Milgram effect. Oversight stops Zimbardo's guards. Private voting defeats Asch's conformity. Slack in the schedule revives the Good Samaritan. Shared goals dissolved Robbers Cave hatred. The doom is not inevitable. It is engineered. And anything engineered can be redesigned. So the question is not whether humans are fundamentally broken. The question is whether we will build systems that bring out our worst tendencies or our best. The research is clear. Design matters more than character. Structure matters more than intention. If that sounds like bad news, think again. It means the problem is solvable. We do not need to change human nature. We need to change human systems. That is the actual lesson of these experiments, not despair. Design.